You are listening to Christian America Ministries Worldwide, a weekly shortwave radio program and online podcast dedicated to uncensored, politically incorrect biblical teaching. Each week, your host, Matthew Dyer, and sometimes a guest, discuss an important topic and shed the light of Scripture upon it. To learn more about Christian America Ministries, visit our website, christianamericaministries.org. And now, the broadcast.
Greetings in the blessed holy name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you for listening to Christian America Ministries Worldwide. I'm your host, Matthew Dyer, and we are broadcasting around the world on shortwave radio and over the internet at our YouTube channel, Christian America Ministries, over on YouTube. We're also on Spotify and other places after the fact as well. You can find out more at our website, christianamericaministries.org. And if you're listening to us on shortwave radio this evening, please be sure to go to our website and fill out a reception report. And if you do that, please let us know how and where you're listening and where you are out in the world, and that will help us know what frequencies are getting the most attention, who's listening to us in what countries or states or whatever it may be. And that helps a radio ministry like this one to know where to put their resources. And we've heard from people from all around the world just in the past few weeks, from the UK to the lower 48 to Hawaii and Canada and so many other places. And I also wanted to do a few shout outs here. We had a few people send in reception reports last week. We had somebody by the name of ZS that sent in a reception report. They were out of upstate New York near Geneva, and they were listening on frequency 9455. And that person there, they said, "I'm not a Christian, but I fully support your free speech and hope all is well with you." Well, ZS there, if you ever want to reach out, I'd be happy to talk to you. And if you're ever interested or curious about Christianity, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and perhaps we can answer some questions that you have. And we have another one here, Ed from Toledo, Ohio. It says here, "I've been a ham radio operator for 44 years. I listen and talk all around the world into space, like to the International Space Station." And he was listening to us on the same frequency. And he said here, "Thank you for bringing the words of God to the world and to my ears over shortwave radio. Remember this, when the infrastructure goes down, and it will, this also will include the internet. Radio will power back up like generators, solar powered, will always reach your audience, the people that will need you the most." Well, thank you, Ed. I hope that never happens. Unfortunately, the way shortwave radio works today, we use the internet to send our broadcast to the station. So if that ever were to happen, the station would probably be stuck with that one program that I sent it right before the internet went down, and that would be it for a little while. I got another one here from Adam from southern Minnesota. He sent in a reception report, said we had excellent signal. That's all he said. And I appreciate all those individuals for sending in those reception reports. It's awesome. I really love hearing from people, not just our internet listeners, but people from all around the world listening to us on shortwave radio. Now, in this broadcast, I'll give you a little warning. I'm getting over a little bit of a head cold, and my voice is just not 100%, which is, I don't know if you all realize this, but this is the worst nightmare for not just a preacher, but also for anyone that has a radio show, is keeping your voice up to par. So please forgive me if I sound a little bit congested. I'm a whole lot better than I was the past 2 days, so just bear with me because I'm almost over it. In this radio broadcast, we're going to be talking about the subject of Ruth in relationship to immigration here in not just the United States, but any Western country. Because the story of Ruth is used by many different people for different reasons. And it's very interesting on how she is used. And the most common use of Ruth when it comes to immigration, multiculturalism, interracial marriage, and things like that is someone will come along and say, "Listen, you can't be against immigration, you can't be against multiculturalism, you can't be against interracial marriage because Ruth of the Bible was a classic example of immigration. She was not of the Israelite people. She was of a forbidden lineage. She was a Moabitess, which was forbidden for her to even come into the land of Israel and intermarry. But we have this beautiful story about how we have, this forbidden Moabitess coming into Israel and intermarrying, and it being all right. It's no big deal. And hey, to top it off, she's in the genealogy of Jesus, even though she wasn't supposed to be, and it was against God's law. Who cares? It worked out. It's beautiful. So why cannot a million Mexicans come migrate to your country, and you treat them just like you would Ruth, of the Bible? Are you a hypocrite? Do you not believe the Bible? Now, I'll digress there. That is how that position goes. That's not the position I hold. That position is wrong. It's an incorrect interpretation of Scripture. And they go to a far extreme with that, even more than I exaggerated there in that demonstration. But then we have another lesser abrasive interpretation, where the conservative right now, or towards the right, some reform people that are against immigration and so forth, they are coming out and they're saying, listen, immigration is all right. Interracial marriage is all right, only if it's limited and regulated. And they will say, here, look at Ruth. She immigrated to Israel, even though it was against God's law. She immigrated there, but she was allowed to immigrate there because she converted to follow the God of Israel. Now, it doesn't matter if she was another ethnic group that wasn't allowed to interbreed with the Israelites. It was forbidden, a different kindred, a forbidden kindred. Doesn't matter, but she came and converted to following the God of Israel. And then, hey, she was even in the genealogy of Jesus, which means he was from a interethnic family, so that has to be acceptable. It just needs to be regulated. Now, Ruth wasn't allowed to go down to Jerusalem and set up a little Moabite town and sell her false gods, so therefore, it's all right. It just has to be heavily regulated. So that is another interpretation that we're going to discuss here in this broadcast. And both of those interpretations, in my opinion, are incorrect, and I'm going to show you from the Scriptures how that can't be the case. And because if Ruth was a Moabitess from a forbidden lineage, and she's in the genealogy of Jesus, that disqualifies Jesus from being the Messiah. That is how important this subject is. And so many ministers misuse and abuse the story of Ruth because they're reading just the story of Ruth, and they're not just the book, but they're not reading the rest of the biblical narrative that goes along with that. And I'll admit, you have to really know the geography and the timeline to better understand what was going on during that time period. And we're going to talk about it here. And I wrote on this, and I've preached on it several times, but I wrote on this in my book, A Case for Biblical Kinism. I wrote a whole chapter on it, dealing with different objections to kinism, because this is an objection. So I want to look at it from a biblical point of view. I'm going to give you my point of view on this passage, or the book of Ruth. But before we do that, I want to play you a clip that was from a podcast that aired last week from Right Response Ministries, and the man speaking is Joel Webben. Now, he is answering different questions during his podcast, and he brings up Ruth. Somebody had sent in a comment that they were a pastor and they were going to preach through the book of Ruth, and then he makes this long comment that I'm going to play here about how about Ruth and how she's a perfect example on how limited immigration and assimilation into a society is biblical. So I want to play you this clip so we can use it as an example. So without further ado, here's Joel Webben.
Ruth is, I had the pleasure of preaching through Ruth before. I'd like to do it again because by God's grace, I think that I've grown. It was years ago, and I think I'd be able to do a better job. But that's a wonderful book of the Bible to address some of the current issues of immigration, those things. We bring up Ruth as a case study often on this show, saying, notice with Ruth, she doesn't say, hey, I'm going to your people will be my people, your God will be my God, but also still, the false Moabite gods and also the Moabite people. In fact, I'm going to come into Israel and I'm going to start little Moabite town, as a subset, within Israel, somewhere, right outside of Jerusalem. And I'm also going to run for, mayor, and I'm going to change policy so that more Moabites can come in and they can that's insane. No, it's when she says to her mother-in-law, who was an Israelite, Naomi, your God will be my God, your people will be my people. That necessarily includes, by way of implication, a forsaking of her previous gods and her previous people. She's saying, I am going to be in Israel. I'm going to assimilate. I'm going to assimilate religiously. I'm going to worship the triune God, the God of Israel. I'm going to assimilate culturally, your people. Right? Sociologically, I'm going to, politically at every level. And it's not a coincidence that from the line of Ruth, so she marries Boaz, then they have Obed. Obed begets Jesse, and Jesse begets David. David becomes the quintessential king of Israel, right? He's a type of Christ. There's no better king than David, other than, of course, ultimately Christ. And he's the second king in the history of the kings. So you start with Saul. Saul turned out not to be so great, but then David comes in. He's a man after God's own heart. So the second king in this kingly line in Israel. But notice that David, who is king, he has a Moabite great-grandmother. But it's not his, he's not a Moabite. And it's not his mother, it's his great-grandmother. Meaning what? That you're now on the fourth generation. You see how that works? Oh, what a coincidence. You have someone who does immigrate into Israel. She's not a heritage Israelite. She's not. But she immigrates, but she doesn't just immigrate. She converts religiously, forsakes idolatry, worships the triune God. She also forsakes not just her false gods, but her prior people. She assimilates fully in, and by the time it gets to her son with Boaz, Obed, and then their grandson Jesse, and then their great-grandson David, David is now, at the fourth generation, a heritage Israelite, a man after God's own heart, and fit to be king. See how that works?
Rules all the people.
Not crazy. Can we do that here, please? Can we please do that here? Ruth.
All right, so that was what he said there concerning Ruth, and I understand his point of view, but I'm a little confused on why he is focusing on 4 generations and how that is significant, because the Scriptures say something totally different. They don't focus on 4 generations. In fact, in Deuteronomy 23, this is what it says here concerning I'm reading out of the King James. It uses the word bastard. Now, in the Hebrew, that is the word mamzer, which is a word used for a mixed breed or somebody of 2 different lineages, one being a forbidden lineage. So this is what it says in Deuteronomy 23, verse 2 through 5. A bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to his 10th generation shall he not enter into the congregation of the Lord. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Now, let's stop there for a second. What would that make Jesus? That would make him of a forbidden lineage within 10 generations of a Moabite. Now, in the King James, the word bastard is used. Like I said, it's from the Hebrew word mamzer. The Strong's Concordance says this for that word: to alienate a mongrel born of a Jewish father and a heathen mother, a bastard. The New King James renders it as illegitimate birth. The ESV renders it as a forbidden union. Even the NIV, which I don't recommend, says a forbidden marriage. The New American Standard renders it as illegitimate birth. So what Joel is acknowledging through his interpretation is that Jesus is of an illegitimate birth. He is of a Moabite within 10 generations. Now that is significant, okay, because Jesus was supposed to be spotless, without blemish, not to be a for lack of a better term, a mongrel. Now, if this position is true, then there are huge theological ramifications because of it. It would make Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Israelites that separated from their Moabite wives because it was a transgression of God's law a bit foolish if you think about it. Because God had already allegedly allowed a Moabite to secretly enter into the congregation of Israel and into the genealogy of the Messiah, mingling the holy seed spoken about in Ezra chapter 9, verse 2. So what was the point for Ezra and Nehemiah to do that when it had already happened? Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, it's because of belief and religion. No, that's not. That's not everything. You know, was never a call to convert any of the Moabites or Ammonites. It was called for them to never enter into the congregation of Israel, which is an idiom for the nation or people of Israel. Look in Nehemiah. It's used in that context. Ezra and Nehemiah and God's law could have put a clause in for the Israelites to convert these forbidden lineages, these wives that they had taken in Ezra and Nehemiah. They have converted them to follow the God of Israel, but that wasn't instructed. It was not even an option on the table. The whole thing had to do with mingling the holy seed, Ezra 9:2, along with and including with turning their hearts away from God. So there's something connected to going after forbidden lineages and turning your heart away from God. It's not one or the other, they're both connected. Now, if this interpretation is true, that Ruth was a true Moabitess of a forbidden lineage in the genealogy of Jesus and David, it would mean that King David and all the kings of Judah were illegitimate and not truly kings over Israel, because God commanded that a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, Deuteronomy 23, 3 and 6, even to the 10th generation. Now, David was the great-grandson of Ruth. This would have disqualified him as a king over Israel. More importantly, this would disqualify Jesus Christ as a descendant of David from being king over Israel as well, because of a forbidden lineage was in his genealogy. Now, this is straight from Scripture. I am not making it up. You can look all these passages up. Now, it is my belief, rather than Ruth was a Moabitess by race, but rather she was a Moabitess because she was born and lived in the land known as the country or the plains of Moab, which had previously been conquered by Israel. And it still retained the name of Moab. Now, this would be akin to someone in Mississippi living right now in Mississippi, and maybe they're white as snow, maybe their ancestry is from Black Africa, but they hold of the name in their the area, the land, region that they're resident in of Mississippi, which is an American Indian name. Or I've given this example many times, somebody from Natchez, Mississippi. Well, I've been to Natchez, Mississippi many times, and there's no Natchez Indians anymore. They are all gone. It's all a mixture of white and black people in the town. None of them, very doubtful, any of them have any genetic connection to the Natchez Indians. So that is what we're talking about, and I'm going to show it to you. Let's go to the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 1, and let's go ahead and read it. And it says here, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons." End quote. Now, at the very beginning of the book of Ruth, we see that the events of the book took place during the times that the judges ruled, the judges of Israel. And we have here an Israelite man named Elimelech went and he sojourned temporarily in the country of Moab due to a famine that happened in the Bethlehem, Judah region. Now, the term here, country of Moab, is a specific region of the land that was conquered by Israel known as the plains of Moab. It's the same area. The Hebrew word here means field or open plain, almost like a prairie. And the reason this is important is the Israelites, after the Exodus, they migrated to the land of Moab, which was on the east side of the Jordan near Jericho. And you can read about that in Numbers chapter 21, 13 through 20. Now, at this time, the Amorites had previously taken the plains of Moab, or the country of Moab, from the Moabites. They had held it Because remember, all these regions over there in the Middle East, much like even today, a lot of the countries and the borders would change during war. So at this moment in time, the Amorites had taken the plains of Moab from the Moabites, and then Israel engaged in war with them and defeated their king and took possession of the plains of Moab. You can read about this in Numbers chapter 21, verse 21 through 32. Very important. I want you to go look up all these passages. And you need to make sure you understand the timeline of all these events, because it all makes a difference when you're leading up to the book of Ruth and who was living where and so forth. So now let's look at Numbers chapter 22, verse 1. It says this, "And the children of Israel set forward and pitched in the plains of Moab on the side of Jordan by Jericho." End quote. Now, you can look in a Bible map, and a lot of your Bible maps in the back of your book, some of your older Bibles at least, they will have the plains of Moab to the east of where Jericho is. Now, the rest of the book of Numbers and almost all the book of Deuteronomy transpire in this region known as the plains of Moab. That's where it all took place. And it was named such because, like I said, it once belonged to the Moabites, but was now in the possession of Israel. Now, I want to read you a quote here from the 17th century theologian Matthew Poole. Many of you may be familiar with him. And in his biblical commentary on Numbers chapter 22, verse 1, he states this concerning the plains of Moab. This is what he said, quote, "The plains of Moab, which still retain their ancient title, though they had been taken from the Moabites by Sihon, and from him by the Israelites." End quote. So what he's talking about here is how the plains of Moab had been taken from the Moabites, actually been taken from the Amorites. The Amorites had taken it from the Moabites, and then the Israelites came and took it from the Amorites, and they held possession over it, and it retained their name. Charles Eliot, in an Old Testament commentary for New English readers on Numbers 22, verse 1, said this, "These plains had belonged to Moab, and since the victory over the Amorites were possessed by the Israelites." End quote. So the region known as the plains of Moab was a possession of Israel. They owned it. They possessed it. It was there that the law of God was read, by the way, to the Israelites 40 years after their exodus out of Egypt. So that was something else that happened in the plains of Moab. Let's now read Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 3 through 5. It says this, "And it came to pass in the 14th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel according unto that the Lord had given him in the commandment unto them, after he had slain Sihon the king of the Amorites, which dwelt in Heshbon, and Og the king of Bashan, which dwelt at Ashtaroth at Edrei, on this side Jordan, in the land of Moab, began Moses to declare this law, saying," end quote. As you can see in that passage, the Israelites possessed the land. That is where they were at that moment in time. And they dwelt there for a many number of years. In fact, Moses died there. You can read in Deuteronomy 32, verse 49 through 50, Deuteronomy 34, verse 5. That is where he died. Also, that is where the Israelites were at right before the conquest of Canaan land, where Joshua was leading Israel over into Canaan. Now, this is very important because the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh really liked the land of Moab, the plains of Moab. They desired to have the plains of Moab for their own possession before the conquest. And Moses granted them this on the condition that they participated in the conquest of Canaan. You can read about that in Deuteronomy 3, 12 through 16, or Numbers chapter 32 through 34, where they were given possession of those lands. Now, those tribes had lived in that land for a number of years and grew to like it. And when the conquest began in Canaan, Joshua reminded all those tribes that they had promised that they would fulfill the conquest need going into the land that had been promised to them by God. They had that land, they like it, that was fine, but they had to help with the conquest. And you can read about this reminder in Joshua chapter 1, verse 12 through 15. Let's go ahead and read it. It says here, Joshua speaking to these people. And to the Reubenites, and to the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, spake Joshua, saying, Remember the words which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, The Lord your God hath given you rest, and hath given you this land. Your wives and your little ones and your cattle shall remain in the land which Moses gave you on this side Jordan, but ye shall pass before your brethren armed, all the mighty men of valor, and help them, until the Lord has given your brethren rest, as he hath given you. And they also have possessed the land which the Lord your God giveth ye them. And then ye shall return unto the land of your possession, and enjoy it, which Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you on this side of Jordan towards the sun rising. End quote. So we have here the reminder. Joshua saying, hey, don't forget your promise, because we need as many men as we can get when we go into the promised land to conquest what God had given all the Israelites. And you can go back, that's fine. Your children and your wives will be fine. The Lord will protect them, is the implication there, but you're going to come and help us fight. So after the conquest of Canaan, the land east of the Jordan was divided among the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now you can read about this in Joshua 13, 8 through 32, 18, 7, and then 22, 9 in the book of Joshua. Now these Israelite tribes continued to live in what was known as the plain of Moab up to the time of the Judges, even though it was still called the name of Moab, because that is what it retained its name over time. And like I said earlier, this is not uncommon even today. In America today, we have thousands of different places named after people that died out thousands of years ago. Just like Mississippi or Kentucky, for example. I'm from Kentucky, and I have no connection through my family tree to any Indians that lived in Kentucky. I've done extensive genealogy. I know that I am not related to any Indians, even though my people settled Kentucky long ago. And they arrived in the land long after the name had been given. So they became Kentuckians. I am a Kentuckian, although I have no connection to any Indian where that name came from. In fact, nobody really knows where that name from, but it was an Indian name. We do know that. Some people say it means dark and bloody hunting ground. And if you read about the history of Kentucky before they started cutting down trees and logging and settling, and it was indeed that. So, after the conquest, all these Israelite tribes, the Reubenites, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh, they went back to the land that was promised to them. They had fulfilled their obligation to go to war, and they went back, but the land still retained the name. And the tribe of Reuben inhabited the region of Moab north of the river Arnon, and you can read about this in Joshua 13, 15 through 23. Now, the Moabites had been forced south of the river Arnon just before the conquest of Canaan by the Amorites, and some Bible maps will reflect this too. They'll have the land of Moab way south of where Reuben is, underneath the river Arnon. And this is very important. So they were forced south by the Amorites, which Israel defeated, and then they just kind of stayed there. And there's even a really fascinating stone that was found right on the border of the Arnon River there. So it would have been on the northern border of where Moab was and where Reuben began, which gives us an historical record of where the border of the Moabites was. Now, this stone is called the Meshna stone, or the Moabite stone, and it was written by King Mesha of Moab around 845 BC. Now, if you read the stone, you can look it up online. The stone speaks about how the Israelite king Omri had been oppressing the Moabites, and many believe that the stone is referring to the events that happened in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 4 through 27, and I would agree with them. So this stone helps us establish where the border in the region of Moab was many, many centuries after that, 840 BC, during the reign of King Omri, long before Ruth, by the way. And that helps us establish that boundary there. Now, the region known as the country of Moab, or the plains of Moab, was north of this region, which would have been where Ruth was living, and it was inhabited by Reubenite Israelites during the times of the Judges, and even many hundreds of years after that as well. Now, since the events in the book of Ruth took place in, quote, in the days when the Judges ruled, this would make it very unlikely that an ethnic Moabite of a Moabite kindred, a forbidden lineage, would be living right in the middle of an Israelite territory, since they were of a forbidden lineage, an enemy of Israel, commanded by God not to marry in with and not to have anything to do with them. Instead, Ruth was known as a Moabitess because of this region that she was born into. No different than someone that is born in Texas, but they may be of Mexican heritage or white heritage or African heritage, whatever it may be. Now, something that we have to understand is the concept of the Levirate marriage in the book of Ruth. In fact, it's the main theme in the book of Ruth. Now, this will help us identify more of who Ruth was. Now that we've kind of went through some of the regional and the geography of the area and some of the conflicts and who possessed what land, very briefly, I admit, in this broadcast, let's now look at some more evidence that may lend some credibility that she was not a Moabitess by lineage. Now, the Levirate marriage was something that was an Israelite practice. And so after Elimelech and his two sons had died, leaving Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth all widows in this land, Naomi hears the news that the famine in her homeland of Judah, which was the reason that their family had sojourned there in the plains of Moab, was gone, and she decided to return home to her family. It's very understandable. I believe many of us would have done the same. So she decided to return back. So let's go ahead and read part of Ruth, Ruth chapter 1, 6 through 14. It says this: "And then she arose with her daughters-in-laws, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her two daughter-in-law, Go and return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead, and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sake that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth claved unto her." End quote. Now, after Naomi informs her daughter-in-laws that she is going back to her home, she instructs them to go back to their mother's household and gives them a blessing that the Lord deal kindly with them. And Ruth and Orpah protested. They desired not to return with Naomi to, quote, thy people. Now, many may use this term, thy people, to prove that we are talking about a different racial group compared to Ruth to Naomi. But remember, the context is Naomi returning back to the land of Judah and the Judahites there, which were her people. This does not mean people from the tribe of Gad or Reuben were not her people in the Israelite sense, but the people of Judah were her people in a tribal sense. So that's really not an argument that could be made. Just like you would say, well, my family or my tribe, they're my people, but that doesn't mean the Anglo-Saxon down the road that you are kindred with is not your people either. It just depends on how you want to look at it. But Naomi was speaking about this in a tribal sense, going back to the land of Judah. So after Ruth and Orpah protested to Naomi, she then tries to convince them to stay behind because she is old and cannot give them any more sons for them to marry. And even if she had 2 sons right at that moment, they would not be willing to wait for them to grow up. It'd take a while to have them grow up to a marriageable age. Now, many people that don't understand what is going on here would think that this conversation has gotten very strange. Why would Ruth and Orpah, why would they be worried about Naomi birthing sons for them to marry? Why is that? Now, in our current culture, this exchange is just odd. But what Naomi is referring to here in this passage and everything here is the Israelite Levirate law, also known as the kinsman redeemer law. You'll often hear it referred to that, in which if a married man, listen to this, if a married man were to die before having children with his wife, so if an Israelite man got married I don't know, he died in some accident or something like that, and his wife had not had children, it was the responsibility of his brother or closest kin to marry her, take care of her, and raise up children, or raise up a son in his brother's name. Let's read about that law, because that is very important context in this passage. Deuteronomy chapter 25, 5 through 10. If brethren dwell together, and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband's father unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders, and say, My husband's brother refuseth to rise up unto his brother a name in Israel, and he will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him, and speak unto him, and if he stand to it, and say, I like not to take her, then shall his brother's wife come unto him in the presence of the elders, and loose his shoe from off his foot, and spit in his face, and shall answer, and say, So shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house, and his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him that hath his shoe loosened. End quote. Now, we have obviously something very offensive going on here towards the guy that is refusing to take his sister-in-law as wife. I mean, there's spitting in the face going on, there's shoes flying. This is not a good thing. So what was the responsibility of an Israelite man is, if your brother died and he was married, it was your responsibility, first and foremost, to not just raise up a child or a son, for your son, for your brother in his name, but you're also to take care of his wife. You not just send her out in the street. And if he refused, it wasn't like a death penalty or anything like that, but it was a shame. I mean, there's people spitting in his face and throwing shoes at him. So this is not a small matter. Now, if one takes the position that Ruth and Orpah were ethnic Moabites from a forbidden lineage, it makes Naomi referring to the Levirate law in Deuteronomy 25 very odd. Let me try to paint this picture here for you. Naomi is concerned in this passage that we just read about Ruth and Orpah not having sons for them to marry in accordance with the Israelite Levirate law in Deuteronomy 25. She's concerned about it. I mean, she's talking about it. That is what the context is. She's concerned, and she's saying, hey, I don't have any sons for you all. There's nothing I can do. So she's concerned about this law of God and being able to fulfill it. And she's saying there's nowhere, we can't fulfill it because I have no more sons. Why is she concerned about the law in Deuteronomy 25 when her and Elimelech completely ignored Deuteronomy 23, allowing their sons to marry women from a forbidden lineage? It doesn't make any sense. It's very odd. There has to be another reason here. I think the position that you have to take in order to harmonize Scripture is Ruth is not an ethnic Moabite, but rather one from just being born in the land of Moab. Now, that position also puts Naomi's character even into more question when we start reading into Ruth chapter 2 and 3, when Naomi is encouraging Ruth to seek out her close relative Boaz in order to fulfill the Levirate marriage. So now you have her encouraging Ruth not to just marry an Israelite one time, one of her sons, and break the law spoken about in Deuteronomy chapter 23. Same law, by the way, that the Israelites in Ezra and Nehemiah read, and they rent their clothes and realized what they were doing, and Ezra and Nehemiah made them send their wives away. Same law. But now we have Naomi's character being put into even more question when she's encouraging Ruth to go to Boaz, another Israelite, and do it again. There has to be another way to harmonize this, and I think the position that Ruth is not a Moabitess by kindred is the only way. Let's read Ruth chapter 2, verse 20. It says this, "And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen." End quote. Now let's read Ruth chapter 3, 1 through 2. "And then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee? Then it may be well with thee. And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast. Behold, he winnoweth barley to night in the threshing floor." And let's drop down to verse 9. "And he said, Woe art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. And he said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning. Inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman. How about there is a kinsman nearer than I? Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of a kinsman to thee. As the Lord liveth, lie down until the morning." End quote. Now, as we see in this passage, Ruth is seeking out Boaz as a close kinsman in order that he may marry her and fulfill the Levirate law. Now, Boaz reveals to her during this correspondence here with each other that there is a kinsman that is closer in kin to her husband, her former husband, than he is. Now, we don't know how close akin they are. We really don't. Boaz could have been an uncle. He could have been a cousin. We really don't know. We're unsure. But he is letting her know that there's someone closer in relation that has a better claim to taking her in the law of the Levirate marriage. And before he can take her, he must first have permission from him in order to take Ruth as a wife. So Boaz goes up to the 10 elders of the city, if you continue reading on in the story. And the kinsman who was closer to Ruth gives up his right to Boaz in order for him to marry her. Now, it's interesting in that story that the closer kinsman is never mentioned, which lends to the credibility of it being a shame. So he's not even mentioned in Scripture. Now, I know what happened was what Ruth wanted to happen and what Boaz wanted to happen, but it was still considered a shame for him to reject the Levirate law. Like I said, it wasn't a death penalty or anything like that, but it was a shame for an Israelite to do such a thing. So if Ruth was an ethnic Moabite, this would put into question Boaz's character. It would put into question the character of all the elders who endorsed this forbidden marriage of a supposed Israelite to a Moabite. And this is how much of an issue misinterpreting the identity of who Ruth is and how you're using it, that's how big it gets. So were all these men reprobates? Were they all just rotten, evil men who were just rejecting God's law completely and just making up their own tradition? Boaz, Naomi, Elimelech. If you misinterpret this passage to have Ruth being an ethnic Moabite, it puts into question all the character of all these people, and it doesn't make them righteous or good. Rather, it makes them rebellious. It makes them in rebellion to God's law, in rejection of God's law, following whatever tradition this is that they've come up with, and that is not the case. So the only way to harmonize Scripture in the book of Ruth is to understand that the plains of Moab, or the country of Moab, was in fact an Israelite territory, and that Ruth was known as a Moabitess because of the land that she was born in, not because she was an ethnic Moabite. That is the only position that makes sense in the Bible and harmonizes Scripture without putting a lot of people's question into character, without making King David an illegitimate king, without making Jesus an illegitimate king and Messiah. But many at this point may be wondering, well, what about Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, where it says this, "And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God." End quote. Now, this verse is often quoted as to allegedly prove that Ruth was not the same kindred or even the same religion as Naomi. Now, if this is true, this again puts Elimelech and Naomi's character into question, because they didn't just allow their sons to marry ethnic Moabites, but also idolaters that weren't converted. Now, Ruth seems to be saying she's willing to convert now that her husband is dead because she loves Naomi so much. Well, think about this for just a second. You're a woman. You're living with your mother-in-law, your husband dies, and you just don't know what to do, but she's going back home, and you don't know where to go, or maybe you don't have anywhere to go, maybe you don't want to go back home, but maybe you're an Odinist and or Hindu, and she's a Christian, and she's leaving, she's on her way out the door, and then on her way out the door, you run up to her as the heathen woman. Okay, my people, thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. I'm willing to convert now. Is that a true conversion? Because she just wants to go with Naomi? I don't think so. One must ask, why was Ruth only willing to convert after her husband died? I mean, that doesn't sound like a true conversion to me. It seems fueled by wanting to go with Naomi and not seeking God or following God. Now, I don't believe that's what this verse is teaching. I don't even think this is speaking about her turning from her heathen gods and following the God of Israel. I would assume that she's already following the God of Israel. She's concerned about the Levirate law and things of that nature. A heathen wouldn't. Now, the Hebrew word here for God is Elohim. And you can look it up. It is Strong's Hebrew lexicon number 430. And it is rendered God in this verse, and it is true that this Hebrew word is often used referring of God and also false gods, but it is also used for leaders, rulers, and even judges in Scripture, the word Elohim. It is used for multiple different reasons, not only just a deity or a false idol or things of that nature. So let me give you a few examples. Exodus chapter 21, verse 6 says here, "Then his master shall bring him unto the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door, or unto the door post, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever." End quote. Now in this passage, the word judges in English is rendered from the Hebrew word Elohim. Same work. Now, remember, a judge is not exactly a judge like we see today. It was a ruler of the time. If you read in the book of Judges, you have the judges of Israel, who were rulers and elders of Israel that ruled and governed. Be another word you could use. Let's look now at Exodus chapter 22, verse 8 through 9. If the thief be not found, then the master of the house shall be brought unto the judges, to see whether he have put his hand unto his neighbor's goods. For all the manner of trespass, whether it be for ox, or for ass, or for sheep, for a remnant, or for any manner of lost thing, which another challengeth to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whom the judges shall condemn, he shall pay double unto his neighbor. End quote. Now, in this passage that I just read you, verses 8 and 9, the word judges in English appears 3 different times, and it is rendered from the Hebrew word Elohim. So this is speaking of, obviously, someone that is judging a matter, investigating a matter, and some kind of leadership position. Now, since we know from Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, that the events of Ruth happened in the in the time of the judges, when the judges ruled, then it would, in my view, mean that what she is saying here is, I will lodge with thy people, meaning her tribal people, and they shall be my people, and thy judges my judges. So during this time, it is the time that the judges ruled over Israel. So what I believe she is saying is, she's not saying that, hey, I want to convert on the fly out here because I want something, it's not sincere, but I'm going to tell you I'm going to convert just so I can go with you. Rather, she's saying, hey, I want to go back with your tribal people. Now, they're the same racial people, but they're different tribes. I want to go with you, and your judge will be my judge. We'll have the same judicial judge over that area because we live in the time of the judges. Now, I think, to me, that makes much more sense than her having this on-the-fly conversion here out of the blue, not because she loves God and wants to follow him, but because she just wants to persuade Naomi to go, for her to go with her. Now, like I said, if she's a heathen, why did they allow their sons to marry heathens? Why is there a heathen there in the house? Why did they not try to convert her already? Why didn't she convert already? It's my belief that she was already a believer and a follower of the God of Israel, or she wouldn't have known or cared what the Levirate law was and why she should fulfill it, and so forth and so on. I mean, why would she care? She was wanting to follow and be faithful to the God of Israel and the laws set forth for the Israelites. And, and many people in many books have theorized that she was, in fact, an Israelite, just born in the land of Moab. That is very possible. She could have been of the tribe of Reuben or a half-tribe of Manasseh, which was very nearby. We don't know exactly where in the land of Moab, but we do know the Reubenites were there. So it's very probable that she was a Reubenite, just born in the land of Moab and a resident in the land of Moab. Or she could have been from another lineage that was the same racial makeup of Israel, but they were not forbidden to marry into. So Ruth is not a good case study, as Joel Webben pointed out, on limited immigration, limited assimilation. Now, I know that's not a very politically correct standpoint, but we don't need limited immigration or limited assimilation of the other races and other cultures into our culture. We have enough of that. We need to turn the faucet off. If Ruth was a real Moabitess by lineage, by the laws of God, she was not allowed to come into the Israel people. There was no clause that says, as long as she converts, she's welcome. That didn't exist. Man has added that through our traditions. That does not exist in the Bible. If it did, there would be a clause, hey, listen, if one of your Israelite men go off and marry someone they're not supposed to, just make sure they convert them before they do. No, that was never part of the deal. Now, I know this is hard for a lot of people to swallow because we have been fed multiculturalism And we've also, if you're a white person out there, a Caucasian of European descent, you've been taught to hate your people and to basically endorse self-genocide and wanting your people to be assimilated with all the other peoples of the world and be destroyed. It is something that has been spoon-fed to us by politically correct Marxists for the last 50 years. 50, 60, 100 years ago, you would have found ministers preaching and teaching the separation of the races. They would have been teaching that interracial marriage and mixing is a sin. How do I know this? I have some of their books. Just average preachers here in America, in South Africa, and elsewhere, teaching from the Bible how this multiculturalism and inter-kindred mixing, interracial mixing, is a sin. Now, if you want to learn more about this topic, without just if you haven't shut the radio dial or turned the YouTube screen off already, I would recommend you go to my website, ChristianAmericaMinistries.org, and read my book, A Case for Biblical Kinism. Now, I'm not trying to sell you anything. You can read it for free. If you want to order a hard copy, that's fine. You can order it there on the website, or you can order it through Amazon. That's fine too. But if you want to read it for free, you can go there. I talk about Ruth. I talk about all the different scriptures that get brought up when this subject gets addressed. For example, I talk about Moses' wife. Did he marry an Ethiopian? Rahab the harlot, who's often called a Canaanite. I talk about Uriah the Hittite, Galatians 3:28, and so many others. One blood. Are we not all one blood? And so many other topics. You can go read it. It's not a very big book, about 90 pages, and there's a lot more that can be said on the topic, but I wrote it to be introductory on this subject, and I would highly recommend you go check it out. And do not let preachers convince you that multiculturalism and immigration is all right in the eyes of God, and that you have to allow the gates of your borders to be wide open for every Tom, Dick, and Harry to flood your country and take over your children's livelihood and steal your land because of Ruth or other passages. That they are using the scriptures unjustly. They're not rightly dividing the word of truth. Well, I hope this broadcast was a blessing to you. For those just now tuning in, you've been listening to Christian America Ministries Worldwide. I've been your host, Matthew Dyer, and we've been discussing Ruth and the story of Ruth in relation to multiculturalism and immigration. You can go to our website, ChristianAmericaMinistries.org, to find out more information about this ministry. And if you're listening to us on Shortwave Radio, please be sure to go fill out a reception report. You can do that through our website. We really appreciate it. And let us know how and where you're listening. And also, those out there on the shortwave radio audience, if you send in a reception report and give me your mailing address, I'll send you a free copy of A Case for Biblical Kinism just for tuning in and telling me where and how you're listening this evening. That way we know who's listening out there on shortwave radio. So 90-page book, I'll send it to you free of charge. Just give me your mailing address and you can read the book A Case for Biblical Kinism yourself. So thank you for listening to Christian America Ministries, and come back next week for another broadcast.
You have been listening to Christian America Ministries. If you're tuning in on Shortwave Radio, we'd love to hear from you. Send us your reception report and we'll send you a free gift. Just visit ChristianAmericaMinistries.org and use the contact page to tell us when you heard this broadcast, your location, the frequency you are listening on, and where you'd like us to send your free gift. That's it. Thank you for listening to Christian America Ministries. You have been listening to Christian America Ministries Worldwide. If you have been blessed by this outreach ministry, please come back next week for another broadcast. And be sure to subscribe to Christian America Ministries on YouTube and Spotify. If you would like to support this ministry and help keep this program on the air, you can donate to Christian America Ministries at our website, ChristianAmericaMinistries.org. Thank you for listening.